All right, I'm going to make a video here regarding the discussion of the mono cylinder head from the two-stroke Yamaha Viper 700. Some of this information that I'm going to talk about in this video is going to be applicable to some of the older two-stroke sleds that Yamaha used to make, but specifically I'm going to be talking about the Yamaha Viper 700. I have a couple of heads here, a couple of head gaskets that I'm going to talk about. I've got some pictures over here in a pile that I'll show you too in a little bit. But basically in this video, I'm going to be discussing things such as the head modification with triple pipes. Do you need it? Do you not need to modify your head? Should you be running the Opticool or Super Cool head gasket from Hawk or Bender Racing? Why the Yamaha cylinder heads were staggered, why they had staggered compression when they came out of the factory, why Yamaha decided to do that. I'll talk very briefly about jetting, very briefly about the necessary heat exchangers that you're going to need if you want to triple pipe these older two-stroke snowmobiles. There's going to be some other things that I discuss that are going to be related to the head modification, just because the whole system is working together as a whole on the snowmobile. However, I would like to keep the information pretty straightforward and more to the point specifically about the mono head. The biggest reason I'm interested in making this video to begin with is because I'm currently triple piping my sled right now, and I just want to share what I've learned through my own research and the help of others about anyone who might be interested in these older two-stroke Yamaha sleds. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I'm going to move on with the video. I am reading off of like a little script here that I wrote up just so I can keep the video. I don't get distracted and off track for the video. So bear with me there on that. But yeah, let's just go ahead and jump right into talking about these. So I will start off by telling you what you're kind of looking at here. What you're looking at here is you're looking at two Yamaha Viper heads. One is from a stock sled, and that would be this one. And this one was from a sled that had triple pipes on it. And the difference here is that why I'm showing both is because this sled came off of a bone stock sled, bone stock pipe, bone stock silencer, exhaust, everything was bone stock on it. This one had SLP triple pipes on it. This head has not been machined or reworked at all. This is how it looks. Sorry, I didn't mean to bump the camera. This is how it looks when it came from the factory. This head was machined by Bender Racing, and I don't know when it was done, but the reason I know it was done by Bender Racing is because it has equal size expansion chambers in each cylinder, which we'll talk about in a second. It also has this stamped on it. BR stands for Bender Racing, and then 2505, that was whoever sent this to Bender to get this head machined, that was their customer order number. So when Bender machines a head, they always stamp it BR and then a customer order number. So this one is just specific. The 2505 is going to be specific to this head. And you could probably contact Bender. I know it's hard to get a hold of them sometimes nowadays, and figure out who actually sent this head in to get machined by this customer order number. They might still have that. The only other difference that you can visually tell, that a head has been machined, kind of. On this head that's been machined, it has a nice smooth transition from the squish band into the expansion chamber, whereas the one on the stock one is kind of sharp. And I think you can see that. You should be able to see that on video. This is a nice smooth transition, and this one's kind of sharp. And I think you can see that on the video. So lastly, I want to explain, sorry, I'm filming this on a different night as I was editing this video. There is another way to tell if your head has already been machined besides the Bender racing stamp if it was done by Bender, or the smoothness of the squish band into the combustion chamber. Another way that you can tell is if you look at this head, you can see that the head has been milled on this. Just by looking at this line here, you can see where it was cut. Whereas on the stock head, if I pick up the stock head, you can see there's no line there. It's just one flat, even surface. Whereas you can see this one was milled and cut lower than what it originally was. So that's just another way that you can tell if your head has already been, if your head has already had work done to it. If you're unsure, I'm not sure if Hawk does any sort of stamping on there. It would be something you could call and ask about. But that's just another way that you can tell if your head has already been machined. Over here on the left side of the cylinder heads, I have two different head gaskets. This one right here on the right is a head gasket. It's the Opticool head gasket from Bender Racing. And this one here on the left is a stock head gasket. So from the factory, I'll just dive right in. From the factory, the Yamaha Vipers, as well as all the other Yamaha two-stroke sleds, had staggered compression across the board, meaning that not every cylinder had the same compression on this sled when it came out of the factory. So I do want to start off by saying that modifying your head, what I'm about to talk about, is entirely unnecessary unless you're installing triple pipes on your sled. So with the stock pipe and silencer, your sled is going to run better with the stock OEM machined mono head. If the Vipers came stock with triple pipes, Yamaha would have not staggered the compression from the factory. Take, for example, the Yamaha SRX, which it did not come staggered. It did not come with staggered compression from the factory because it came with triple pipes. And I'll get into that in a few minutes. So throughout the video, I'm going to be referring to each of the parts of the cylinder head by a different term. So I'm going to be referring to it as the PTO cylinder, the center cylinder, and the mag cylinder. So the way I'm holding this mono cylinder head right now is the way that you would see it if you were sitting on the sled looking down at the engine. So this is the left side of the engine. This is the right side of the engine. On the left, this is the PTO cylinder. If you don't already know, PTO stands for power takeoff. It's referring to the clutch side. So your clutches are over here. And then your center cylinder is just the center cylinder. And then the mag side cylinder, if you don't know, mag stands for magneto. That's the right side. So this is the side that your recoil would be on, for example. So if you took a stock Viper and you were to do a compression test on your cylinders with no head work, it's a stock Viper, you should get somewhere between 110 psi to 115 psi in the PTO cylinder, somewhere between 120 and 125 psi for the center cylinder and the mag cylinder. So the compression readings are going to be the same on the center cylinder and the mag cylinder on a stock machined head stock Viper. The PTO side is going to have a little lower compression. So yes, it's normal to get a lower compression reading in the PTO cylinder than what the readings are for the center and the mag cylinder. There's a couple reasons why the compression reading is lower in the PTO cylinder when you could have put a compression tester on it. The biggest reason is that the combustion chamber is larger on the PTO cylinder with 24 cc's, and it's smaller on the center and the mag cylinder with only 21 cc's. Cc's stands for cubic centimeters, and it's simply a physical measurement of the volume inside of the combustion chambers. So since the PTO cylinder has a larger combustion chamber of 24 cc's, it naturally has a lower compression reading than the other two cylinders. So in other words, there's more volumetric space inside of the PTO cylinder Therefore, it reads a lower PSI in compression. So when we're talking about two-stroke engines, it's important to take into account the difference between the compression you read on a compression tester and the actualized compression of the engine while it's running. I know this sounds confusing. Let me just explain a little bit. A lot of people used to think that Yamaha had staggered the compression from the factory in order to compensate for having equal jetting in the carburetors. And I used to think this too, but now I realize this simply isn't the case. The reason Yamaha really staggered the compression on these Yamaha two-strokes all boils down to the way that a two-stroke engine works with the expansion pipe. Unlike a four-stroke engine, a two-stroke engine has a large exhaust pipe known as the expansion chamber. And on our Yamaha Viper stock, this is the large curved pipe that our three flanges go into, or our three exhaust manifolds are going into this one large curved pipe. And the large shape of the pipe is like this for a reason, is to increase the engine's power by increasing its compression. Tongue twister for me. Shouldn't have been, but tongue twister. It sounds really complicated, and it is. Basically, this means that the engine is using the expansion pipe to help it push more air-fuel mixture into the cylinder. And I'll explain a little further. Now, I'm definitely by any means not an expert on this. There's a lot of engineering that goes into the way that a two-stroke engine runs best. But I'll try my best to quickly simplify the theory and then move on to the rest of the video regarding the Viper's monohead. All right, so there's a couple different shapes that go into the engineering of an expansion pipe on a two-stroke. I printed off this picture to simplify it and then also labeled it. I also put on here two-stroke pipe theory because if you're interested in more how this works, there's a lot of stuff you can find online if you look up two-stroke pipe theory. But I went ahead and just labeled this with the most common terms. So basically you have your header pipe, we have our engine, and then our header pipe on our sled. These are the three flanges that come off of our engine and meet at the expansion chamber, or the three exhaust manifolds that meet, that come together as one with our W-shaped manifold. So you have your header pipe, and then you have your diffuser cone. That's this shape that expands out. To diffuse something means that you're broadening its airflow. In other words, reducing the speed of something. We have a neutral chamber. A lot of people call it the belly, so I put belly on there too. Sorry, I should probably hold this up a little bit for you. Then you have your baffle cone, that's this shape here. And then you have your exhaust gas outlet pipe. Other people call it this would go to your stinger, or in our case, or in my case, I won't have stingers, I'm just gonna have a silencer. So that's where that would go. The baffle cone, I forgot to mention this, but baffle means to restrain the flow of something, if you didn't already know. So long story short, a two-stroke engine uses the expansion pipe to emulate pressure waves coming from the combustion chamber. So as the high pressure exhaust gases come out of the combustion chamber into the expansion chamber, there's also some high pressure waves that are created and pushed out along with the gases. So these waves are going to travel with the exhaust gases through the shape of the expansion pipe. The way that the expansion pipe is shaped, the gases and high pressure waves are only traveling together until they get to the baffle cone. So once the high pressure waves and the exhaust gases get to the baffle cone, the waves rebound and they go back, and the exhaust gases continue out. And right now in the video, I'm probably going to put, this is actually a GIF that I printed off online, and I slowed the GIF way down on a website so you guys can see this happen. It happens very fast, but I slowed it down, and I'm probably going to put the GIF up right here. So the reason that the gases are being compressed, or I'm sorry, the reason that the waves rebound at the baffle cone is because the exhaust gases are being compressed at the baffle cone, which causes the waves to build pressure and then reverse in the opposite direction. So keep in mind this is all happening within like milliseconds. But the high pressure waves travel back through the pipe after they rebound. So the pressure waves are rebounding. So the gases traveled through out the header pipe. They created pressure waves. The pressure waves rebounded at the baffle cone, and the exhaust gases continued out. So that's where we're at. As the pressure waves come back through the expansion pipe, they reach the exhaust port again. And at about this time, the engine is on its power stroke, meaning that it's drawing more fuel or air mixture in. And the pressure waves put pressure on the fuel and air mixture to keep it from exiting the exhaust port. It's really confusing. There's a lot of videos online that explain this better than I'm explaining it, I'm sure. But this is much different than a four-stroke because a four-stroke has valves. And in a four-stroke engine, the exhaust ports would be closed at the exhaust valve or by the exhaust valves at the time that the fuel or air mixture is being drawn in, which would prevent it from the gases from exiting the cylinder. So since two strokes have no valves, without the pressure waves from the expansion pipe pushing against the fuel air mixture, the mixture would just escape through the open exhaust port. So I hope I was able to put that GIF in there, or GIF, and it helped you out. But in the end, the pressure waves from the expansion pipe are actually increasing the compression in the combustion chamber as they enter back into the cylinder through the exhaust port. So on the Vipers, the way the expansion pipe is shaped and designed, there was a natural tendency to push more pressure waves back into the PTO cylinder than the tendency was to push it back into the center and the mag cylinder, if that makes sense. So in other words, the flow of returning pressure from the shape of the expansion pipe had an easier route into the PTO cylinder than the other two cylinders. So the PTO cylinder stock received much more pressure in waves than the other two cylinders did. And that was, like I said, due to the shape and the flow of the expansion pipe. So that is the true reason why the PTO cylinder has a lower compression or a bigger combustion chamber than the other two cylinders from the factory. So with the extra pressure of the waves, the void in compression is made up in the PTO cylinder while the engine is running. So like I said, while the compression is lower in the PTO cylinder when you could put a compression tester on the engine, the actualized compression of the engine while the engine is running should be the same in every cylinder. There's just not really a good way to test that while the sled is running, of course. So all that being said, when you put triple pipes on your Viper, you're automatically going to have an equal amount of pressure waves coming back into each cylinder's exhaust port. So this is the case because each cylinder is going to be running on its own expansion pipe, right? Therefore, there's no longer a need to have a bigger combustion chamber in the PTO cylinder. I hope that makes sense. So if you're piping a Viper, you need to have the head work done. If you don't, then you will actually be running the PTO cylinder on a lower compression than the others because it has a larger expansion chamber. So this isn't ideal for maximum performance, obviously, which I'm going to assume you're after because you're researching how you pipe your sled to begin with. So like I said before, the stock Viper head has a 24cc combustion chamber in the PTO cylinder and a 21cc combustion chambers in the center and the mag cylinders. So usually when you send your stock mono head off to get machined by Bender or Hawk, they're going to machine the center and the mag cylinder combustion chambers to the 24cc size to match the PTO cylinder. So we have 24cc stock, 21cc in these two stock. They're going to machine these two combustion chambers bigger until they get to the 24cc size of this PTO cylinder combustion chamber. So they want all of them to match. So most likely they're all going to be 24 cc's in size. So now if you took it and you left it alone like this, meaning only the combustion chambers were enlarged and nothing else was done, your total engine compression would actually go down because now you have bigger combustion chambers overall, if that makes sense. So more space, more volumetric space in each combustion chamber is going to be equivalent to less compression. So in order to bring the compression back up after machining the center and the mag side cylinders to the 24 cc's that the PTO cylinder has, in order to bring that compression back, they would mill the head. Some people call this shaving. And then they would recut the squish band. So this would reduce the size of the combustion chambers, and then it would increase your compression back to your desirable number. So they cut the combustion chambers to equal sizes, then they mill the head, and then they cut the squish band. This will give you your equal compression across the board. So do note that the amount of material that they mill off the head will be or would have been entirely up to the customer. Most likely they would have asked you what type of gas you want to run in the sled, and then they would mill the head accordingly. So the higher octane, for example, the higher octane gas you want to run at the sled or run the sled at, the more material they would mill from the head, which would result in a higher compression. So I'm getting into a whole different type of topic now, but I did want to briefly bring that to your attention too. So also note that it would not be wise to machine the head on a Viper if you're still going to run the stock pipe. And so if you were to send your head off to get machined to have equal compression in every cylinder and then run a stock pipe, what you would actually be doing would be creating too much compression in the PTO cylinder because it would have the same compression as the center and the mag cylinders, plus the extra compression from the exhaust waves coming back into the PTO cylinder, the excess coming back into the PTO cylinder while the sled was running. So this would obviously cause too much compression. Obviously, it could cause spark knock, detonation. So the next thing, sorry, I keep bumping the camera. The next thing I want to talk about is using SRX heads. Now I'm definitely not an expert on using the SRX heads, but I will share with you what I do know. But do know I've never had an SRX myself, but I do know a little bit about them. So I did a super quick search on this online and read a little bit. And I know very little about the SRX, so make sure you please do your own research regarding this. But here's what I know. If you're running SRX heads on your triple piped Viper, which some people do, you need to change the base gasket too. And I think I have a picture of this. So the SRX cooling flow of the base gasket is made to work in sync with the heads that came on the SRX. So if you're using a machined stock Viper head, you should run the stock Viper base gasket. So in this picture, sorry, I'm not doing a very good job of holding this up for you, but this is the Viper base gasket. and this top one here is the SRX. You can see it says SRX on it. So like I said, if you're using a stock machined Viper head, you should run the stock Viper base gasket. As it is too made to work in sync with the Viper head coolant flow direction. So the pros to running an SRX head would include equalizing the compression and better cooling. So the SRX had equal compression across the board when they came stock because they came with triple pipes. So that's pretty much it. Just the compression, equal compression, and better cooling seems to be pretty much all the pros that I know of running SRX heads versus the stock Viper head that with having it machined. So I do know that there are some cons to running the SRX heads on your Viper. And some of those would be that you have to install a water rail. You'll still have to have the SRX heads shaved or milled to compensate for the thickness of the Viper head gasket, which is about 0.030 inches, I've heard. And that's pretty much all I know for the SRX heads, as I did most of my research regarding the stock Viper mono head. I do also know, though, that the SRX and the Viper base gaskets are different. So this picture of them that I showed you, that they're side by side, the SRS gasket is labeled at the top here. But you can notice the size and the difference of the coolant passages in the two gaskets. They look the same from a distance, but up close, there is a difference in the coolant passages of these two base gaskets. All right, so now I want to talk a little bit more about cooling requirements. So let's just go ahead and dig into this just a little bit. So as far as piping your Viper goes, it was recommended by Yamaha that you do some additional modifications regarding the cooling system, which would help dissipate the heat and keep your sled running or your engine running at an optimal temperature. So this next section of the video is going to be about the cooling requirements needed to accommodate for triple pipes on the Yamaha Viper. So if you are not triple piping your engine, these modifications are not necessary at all. You'll hear people on Facebook saying that you need to install the rear heat exchanger that came stock on the 2004 Vipers. However, this simply isn't the case. Many say they have overheating problems. The Vipers have overheating problems from the factory, but majority of the time, overheating is simply operator error, which is something that needs to be understood. But one example of this might be poor snow conditions. So with marginal snow, they do overheat easily if they don't have the rear heat exchanger. But you should be riding your sled in a acceptable amount of snow. Another example of operator error would be overfilling the coolant reservoir tank on a Viper. There is, in fact, a reason why the coolant reservoir has a cold mark and then a hot mark on the reservoir tank. Some people kind of just ignore these markings and just fill it all the way up so they have enough coolant just in case they lose some. And then it's no surprise when the rider sees a bunch of white smoke pouring out of the reservoir tank underneath their sled. So in this situation, the rider would panic, obviously, and then since they see a bunch of white smoke and coolant pouring out, they automatically assume that their sled is overheating when in reality, the pressure just built up and they simply overfilled the reservoir tank. So just to kind of prove this or add to it, on the 1998 SRX, for example, overheating was never a problem because it had a coolant catch overflow tank in addition to the reservoir. So when people overfilled the 1998 SRX, it didn't just dump the coolant onto the ground when it overflowed. It actually dumped the coolant into an overflow tank. The SRX also had a larger coolant reservoir tank, which made it far less likely to puke out the coolant as there was more air volume to compress before it started overflowing. The Vipers, they really do have a pretty small reservoir tank. So it's no surprise that if you overfill it, the air inside of there compresses and then it dumps onto the ground and people get worried. So Yamaha did offer, moving on a little bit from that, Yamaha did offer a dealer upgrade on the 2003 and 2004 model Vipers, in which the rear heat exchanger could be added onto the sled as a dealer additional upgrade. And that was if the buyer chose to pay an extra $50. So if, to kind of go over that again, if you went in to the dealer and bought a brand new Yamaha Viper in 2003 and 2004, they would also offer you a rear heat exchanger as a package type deal. And the reason why they offered this heat exchanger was Yamaha started offering this in response to the complaints of previous year Viper owners about overheating. So Yamaha also offered the rear heat exchanger to the public to buy in 2003 and 2004, which it was also $50. You could buy one for $50, came with the rivets and everything. So keep in mind the heat exchanger for the Viper was different from the SRX rear heat exchanger. The Viper's rear heat exchanger had a bleed screw, a bleed hole on the top, and the SRX didn't. So let's go ahead and talk about some more reasons why the Vipers overheat, or a reason for overheating. It could be air bubbles in the coolant system. The temperature sensor could be faulty in the head. And apparently it's not uncommon for the temperature sensors to read inaccurately after just slightly overheating one time. So the temperature warning light from that sensor should come on when the coolant temperature reaches 212 degrees Fahrenheit, which is obviously boiling. If you're overheating, it might not be a bad idea to check if your thermostat is working properly. They do go bad every once in a while, along with the temperature sensor. So yeah, don't be fooled by a defective sensor. It happens. As far as the thermostat goes, you can check if it's functioning properly or not. There's plenty of videos to do that on YouTube. You can learn how to do that. I'm not going to talk about that, but according to the manual, what I will tell you is the Viper's thermostat should open between 119 and 126 degrees Fahrenheit. So do with that information as you will. SRXs, they did actually have trouble with overheating due to the thermostat design. It was mounted horizontally instead of vertically like the Vipers. So they often had problems jamming up because of the placement. And this design was obviously changed when the Viper came into production. Yamaha realized that. So I do want you to also note that the SRX and the Yamaha Viper hold different volumes of coolant. The SRX comes with triple pipes from the factory, so it was made to hold more coolant to compensate. Though the heat exchangers may look the same visually, the SRX's heat exchangers are actually 3/16 of an inch thicker than the Vipers, and that goes for both the bulkhead and the tunnel. So they have the same surface cooling, but the SRX holds more coolant to compensate for the triple pipes that it comes with in stock form. Also do note that the SRX has a rear heat exchanger installed from the factory on all the models due to the extra heat created by the triple pipes. So that being said, when you add 25 horsepower or so to your Viper through the pipes, you're going to want to be sure that your sled has the extra cooling capacity through the rear heat exchanger in order to compensate for the extra heat that you're creating. If you're lucky, your sled might already have one. Mine's an 04. It already came stock with the rear heat exchanger. So with the extra horsepower that you're bringing with the pipes comes more heat, which brings the necessity of having that extra cooler in the rear. All right, head gaskets. So I know I've talked about the rear heat exchangers now, and the heat exchangers, the difference between the SRX, but now I want to briefly discuss the head gasket modification that's needed to support the extra heat that you're going to bring with the triple pipes into your engine. So I have two different head gaskets here. I talked about this earlier. I'll do a quick recap. This is a head gasket from Bender Racing. It's called the optical head gasket, and this is a stock head gasket. So as I said before, more power equals more heat. So now that you've added extra heat into the cylinders with the triple pipes, now you need to take a step back and you need to help the cylinders cool down more efficiently. And that's where these aftermarket head gaskets come into play. So in addition to the rear heat exchanger, an aftermarket head gasket is also necessary. If you're using the stock head, don't forget that it needs to be machined for triple pipes. But if you're using the stock head, you have two options of head gasket to run. You have the Bender Racing optical head gasket, or there's another head gasket called the Super Cool head gasket by Hawk Performance. And they're the exact same. This one specifically came from Bender Racing. The Hawk Super Cool, it's the exact same head gasket. They're just produced by two different brands. Looking at these gaskets, talking about why we need them, what do they actually do, you might ask. So they look very different. The stock one is basically all wide open, whereas the aftermarket one is pretty closed off in terms of, when talking about coolant passageways. And what the aftermarket head gasket does is it reroutes the coolant flow through the head of the machine. So it's rerouting. It's going to reroute the coolant to help cool the cylinders more evenly. So without the aftermarket head gasket, when you're running a stock head gasket, it's really not uncommon to see as much of a 60-degree Fahrenheit difference from one cylinder head to the opposite side of the cylinder head. And so this optical head gasket, it's designed to work in sync with the direction of coolant flow in the machine. So I have this picture here. This is the coolant flow route of a 2004 Yamaha Viper 700. You can see it has the rear heat exchanger. But basically the coolant flow goes as follows. It goes from the reservoir down to the right heat exchanger, back through the rear heat exchanger, to the left heat exchanger, to the front bulkhead heat exchanger, and then it goes through this tube 15 to the water pump, which would be right in here, and then the coolant is pushed up through the cylinders and then comes out through this number 4 tube out of the cylinder head right here, back through the thermostat, and then back into the reservoir. So earlier I said your thermostat opens at 119 to 126 degrees. So think about this too. If your engine's not warmed up to 119 to 126 degrees yet, the thermostat's not going to allow coolant from the heat exchangers to come into the engine. And what it really does is it's just rerouting the coolant flow. So instead of going to the water pump and up through the cylinders, it's going to reroute it. So this is going to close off your thermostat, and then it's naturally going to get rerouted through this number 14 tube here. This is called a coolant bypass system, in where the coolant is simply recirculated through the cylinders until it's warmed up to that 119 to 126 degree temperature. So the coolant exits the cylinder out of the mag side, PTO center mag. Here's where the coolant is exiting the cylinder. This means that the PTO cylinder coolant has the most difficult time exiting the head to go off to the heat exchangers. And this is why the optical head gasket reroutes the coolant flow. And by doing that, it's optimizing your coolant or your cylinder head temperatures. So I hope this video helped. Just to kind of do a quick recap on everything here. if you're triple piping your engine, you need the extra cooling to compensate for the extra heat that you're going to be putting in the cylinders. And that extra cooling includes the rear heat exchanger, the opticool, or the supercool head gasket. If you're not triple piping your engine, the rear heat exchanger and opticool or supercool head gaskets are entirely unnecessary. And lastly, you do not want to run a machined head with equal pockets with the stock pipe and silencer of the Yamaha Viper. And what that would do would be create too much compression in the PTO cylinder and sort of be a waste of money. So I hope this video helped. I spent a lot of time kind of writing up a script for this video, deciding what were the important things to talk about, and then what I could leave out of the video so the video would be not super long, but also the most beneficial I can make it. So I hope the video helped. If you're not already a part of our Yamaha Facebook group, there is a Facebook group that I'm the admin of. There's actually two that I'm the admin of. One is called All Chassis Yamaha Two-Stroke Snowmobile Owners, and then the second group that I'm the admin of is called Yamaha SX Viper 700 Owners. And you can join those on Facebook. If you submit a request to join, please do fill out the questions that we ask you when you join the group. This is kind of just to help filter out bots and stuff like that. But feel free to join our group. At the top of the group page, I have a files section where I post all kinds of different old files that you can't necessarily find online for these older Yamaha two-stroke sleds. So I put a lot of that type of stuff in there. There's also a lot of people in there that are just super knowledgeable. And we would love to help you and have you in our group. So I hope this video helped. In the description of the video, I'll probably have a script type thing going about everything that I talked about in the video. I'll try to get that link posted in the description if I can. And other than that, have a great rest of your day.